Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another AlphaStaff webinar in our 2018 webinar series. So today, as you see on your screen, we're going to be taking some time to talk about harassment and discrimination as it pertains to the workforce and as it's required under California regulations. So hopefully, if you're on the call today, you are from California, you work in California, or otherwise live there and are a manager. So please know that this is a mandated training and you do want to be engaged and active. Let me just cover a couple of things first. If my computer, here we go. So we do have a chat feature and we encourage you to use that. As I mentioned, it's an interactive session, so you may be called upon to answer some questions. Don't be shy. We will also open up our question and answer time at the end of the webinar. And if you or a colleague want to view the webinar again, please know that it is on our website and it is under Client Resources, Business Training Webinars. You'll find several webinars are there in our archive. So as I mentioned, today's class is 2 hours in length, and there is a code that actually exists in the California law that says managers must attend a class that is interactive. So like I mentioned, please speak up, don't be shy. We'll ask for your input and we will ask review questions, so you may want to be taking some notes. And also feel free to ask your own questions throughout the training through the chat feature. And if you could please make sure in the room that you are viewing or watching the webinar that you keep the noise levels down, especially if you have a group on a speakerphone. We can mute you, and I believe right now everyone is muted. And if you do want to ask a live question, again, please use the chat. Don't put your phone on hold unless it's muted, because we do hear background music. So keep that in mind. And then if once we open up the lines, be prepared to unmute your phone so that you can answer questions or share your insights. Today's speaker is one of our own, Jamshed Khan. He is an HR account manager. He does reside in California. He's been with us about a year, a little over, I think, and he has a ton of experience interpreting and applying California's employment laws, which can be quite tricky. And he's also successfully created and implemented many HR practices and procedures for 600 employees and more. He's supported the growth to 10,000 employees in a multi-state operation that involved the day-to-day ops, employee relations, risk management, employment law, and training. So you are in very good hands, and I will turn this over to Jamshed in just a moment. I'm giving the controls to him. There you go, Jamshed.
Great. Thank you, Sandy, for that introduction. Really appreciate it. Welcome to all of you, and for taking time away from your busy schedules to attend this state-required training for those of you who are 50 employees. Sandy did mention some of my experience. One thing I want to add is that throughout the years, what doesn't surprise me is that this still continues to happen. The difference between then and now is that people are more vocal about it, and there's more information out there. There was a wonderful training that was held a few months ago by our colleague Cindy Williams that she gave an example about the Me Too movement. And I'm assuming all of you are familiar with it, and the road is taken and the direction is taken, how many people are coming out. Most recent thing I saw in the news was with Russell Simmons and all these allegations, by individuals. And over time, what I've experienced is that whether the allegations are true or false, it can severely impact a person's career, their friendships, their relationships, etc. I remember I used to work at a college for about 10 years, and there was a 10-year track faculty, somebody very renowned in the industry, had written numerous books. Students would come from all over the world to take his course. He was accused of sexual harassment. And the long and short of that is once he was found guilty, not only did he lose his job, his marriage ended up in a divorce. He lost a circle of friends, a big circle of friends, because of the shame that it brought. And at the time, there was severed ties with his daughters. All of this because of something he thought was okay to do. So it does happen, and my goal is to make sure everyone is aware of how to take preventive action. Today's agenda is we'll talk about the law, about harassment and discrimination. We'll talk about bullying, the impact of these different actions, how to prevent that as a supervisor, manager, business owner, and how to take corrective actions as an organization, as a manager, as a supervisor. So just waiting for the slide to load here. Okay. Sorry, just technology issues here. So just a friendly reminder that, as Sandy said, this is a safe environment for questions. There are no dumb questions. We want to make sure that we're confidential. We're not using individuals' names in a hypothetical situation because it might be in a group setting right now. And although you may not agree with everything that is discussed with the objective of training, it is your responsibility to be compliant with the law. So why are you here apart from being required by California as a 50+ employee organization? Well, not only the legal requirements, but basically it is because of your role. You're either supervisor, manager, or person in authority or power who has to play an important role in identifying and preventing harassment and discrimination. You guys are the frontline defense of the organization, and you set the tone. So if you are managing your employees and managing them well, you can avoid having a lot of these issues at your workplace that still seem to happen. After completion of this training, sorry, we're just having some issues with the slide here. Oh, we have some technical issues. Apologize for that. Thank you, Sandy. So after completion of this training, you will be able to understand what comprises harassment, who can be a victim of harassment, how to identify and address the inappropriate behaviors, how to avoid legal conduct and to manage harassment in the workplace, and how to respond appropriately to a harassment complaint. Next slide. I do want to remind you that a legal disclaimer here that this is not legal advice. The information I'm going to provide to you is considered good HR practice. And if you follow some of these guidances that I provide, you'll be able to avoid exposure or minimize exposure to your company. I think we're having a little trouble controlling the slides here. The next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the law, the provisions of the California and federal law in preventing harassment. So here are some of the laws regarding harassment and discrimination in the United States. We have the Civil Rights Act back in 1856, which basically said that all men, regardless of race, have the right to buy property. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which provided protected categories. Someone belongs to a certain race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The 1967 Age Discrimination Employment Act, which prohibits discrimination based on anyone over 40 years of age. In 1990, we had the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there are various medical conditions that might fall into a disability. 1993, we had workplace must be free from harassment discrimination clause. And in 2000, USARA, which is Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act of 2000, basically protected those who belong in the armed military forces or are veterans of the military forces. Next slide. So here are some sexual harassment laws I wanted to point out to you. Assembly Bill 76 makes it employers liable for sexual harassment encountered by employees by anyone in their workplace. Could be customers, could be vendors, could be their peers, could be supervisors, managers, basically anybody they come in contact with in their work environment. As mentioned before, legal part of this requires employers with 50 or more employees to provide training at least 2 hours of sexual harassment training every 2 years and every 6 months or within 6 months for new supervisors. The EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a federal agency that enforces civil rights laws from workplace discrimination, their definition of a supervisor is basically somebody who recommends or has the authority to recommend tangible employment decisions, whether they're hired, promoted, fired, et cetera, direct the employee's day-to-day work activities or to take disciplinary action against them, such as termination, demotion, etc. Here's an interesting chart that shows the largest charge of discrimination and harassment in the United States. You will see that number one is retaliation with almost 38,000 cases. Number two is race cases, and then number three is sex-related cases. There's some important facts here to show you that this does exist. About federal protected categories. Again, here's the list: age, people 40 and over, national origin, religious creed, disability, pregnancy, race, and sex. In California, however, you'll see the list is twice as long. It's a great place to do business. We love the weather here, but there's a lot of employment laws that protect individuals, so we have to be aware of that. People are protected with law just from race, color, creed, religion, sex, pregnancy, childbirth, national origin, age, marital, domestic partner status, breastfeeding mothers, physical or mental disability, HIV, AIDS, medical condition, Vietnam era veteran status, sexual orientation, transgender status, which is new. I do want to point out with the transgender status, even somebody who's in transition from one gender to another, they're protected as well. And we'll talk more about transgender because this is a new topic. And also those individuals who might be perceived as belonging to one of these categories, even though they may not be. They're considered protected as well. Here's some information about largest charge of discrimination in California. So in California, number one is retaliation, same as the federal chart that I showed you, which is interesting here, right? Number two is sex. I believe race was number two in the federal, but number two is sex in California. So, and number three was disability. So here's a question for you guys. We're not checking the issues, so I guess the answer loaded so you guys can see. So basically, employees have 1 year from the time the harassment actually occurred to file a case or complaint of discrimination with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. Okay, so just keep that in mind. They have 1 year. Moving on, remember that your harasser, you can personally sue it in the civil court as well as the employer that can be sued after a complaint has been filed with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, and a right to sue notice has been issued. So using the chat feature now, I'm going to try to engage those of you who are in participation. True or false, a customer, a vendor can sexually harass you? I'll give you a couple of minutes to respond. If you can go ahead and type your answers. Oops. So that is true. A customer or vendor can sexually harass you. Let's move on to the next one. If you have the authority to recommend a promotion or tell an employee what to do on a shift, you are defined as a supervisor in California. That is true as well. The most popular discrimination charge in the US is retaliation. That is true. Federal law has more protected categories than California. That is false. California is, as we just viewed, twice as long as the federal protected categories. And the last one, you have 1 year to file a complaint with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing if you believe you have been harassed. That would be true. Thank you to those who participated. Let's move on here. Let's talk about harassment and discrimination in the workplace. The definition for harassment is anything that's unwelcome conduct based on a protected category, or it could be based on a condition of employment, whether someone's hired, terminated, promoted, et cetera, or the condition is so severe or pervasive that it creates an intimidating, hostile, or abusive environment. The definition of discrimination is the treatment of one group in favor of one group rather than against those belonging to another group. So for example, in the workplace, all the female employees are getting promotions and the male employees are not, although they're all equally skilled. It could also be based on a group, class, or category to which that person belongs to, rather than based on their own individual merit, as we talked about. Definition of sexual harassment is, as we talked about, unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or submission to such conduct by the individual becomes a term or condition of employment, or submission or rejection to is used as the basis for an employment decision. And the last one, which seems to happen a lot, is such conduct has the effect to interfere with the person's performance or creating a hostile or intimidating environment. Imagine that person feels so threatened to come to work that they're actually not able to perform every day. And you as a manager, supervisor, will see that. You'll impact whatever project they're working on. There'll be more mistakes, or it'll impact the bottom line eventually, with the turnovers, et cetera. So we want to be careful about that. There are two types of protections, federal and state. The federal ones are based on the protected categories we talked about. For state, California Fair Employment and Housing Commission prohibits any harassment based on sexual nature, gender harassment. And by the way, a sexual desire does not have to be a motivating factor in gender harassment. Harassment could be based on pregnancy, childbirth, medical conditions. And there are different forms of offensive behavior that include harassment of a person of the same gender as the harasser. In California, gender has, the definition of gender includes a person's gender identity, how that individual views their gender, rather than what their birth gender was. How they express their gender, it could be the clothing that they wear, the jewelry that they wear. Their assigned sex at birth has no bearing on this. And the requirement expectation is that employers allow them to dress consistently with whatever their identity is. Again, mind you, as I mentioned earlier, somebody could be in transition, surgery to another gender. So you want to be careful about that as well. So discrimination, we all discriminate at some point or the other, right? When we're deciding where to eat, where we're looking at Yelp reviews. I think in California, we're really used to Yelp, right? I know I do it a lot with my wife. We're deciding what movie to watch. We're looking at some of the ratings on IMDb or what have you. We're deciding on which team to root for, right? So we do discriminate all the time. And sometimes that discrimination can be destructive and could be wrong. So we have to look at our own individual biases, right? How we were raised, what background we belong to, any of the protected categories. Those do create certain biases. However, as professionals, we have to remember not to let those biases affect the workplace. Usually when I do employee trainings, I like to throw out the statement. It might seem sort of harsh, but I do tell them that you're not hired for the way you look, for the way you dress, for how you joke with people, for how fit you are, et cetera, et cetera. You are hired for one reason and one reason alone, and that's to do a job and to do it well, right? And so nothing else outside should impact that. So two types of harassment. There are two types of harassment. There could be economical and it could be environmental. Economical is when things such as there's a termination that takes place, demotion, there's a promotion or pay increase. These affect the tangible part of an employee's employment, right? Or it could be environmental, such as the verbal abuse, the physical abuse, emotional, sexual abuse. Occurring, and also environment harassment could be either a peer, supervisor, subordinate, anybody basically comes into interaction with that individual in the workplace. It could be severe or pervasive, unwelcome, it could be directed at a certain category, and it could be offensive to a reasonable person. So we talked about severe pervasive. What is that? Anytime, so it could be an incident that could be a single incident, sexual assault or rape. I know part of this Me Too movement that's happened is also on these campuses. A lot of the female students are coming forward in the Me Too movements about this language. So it could be grabbing, fondling, forcibly kissing, or any other acts of violence, intimidation. Pervasive could be something that's less serious and it happens over time, right? So maybe whistling at somebody, looking at somebody, verbal, physical, non-physical, and we'll talk about those two. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and reach out to you guys who are, again, on the panel. If you could go ahead and name the harassment, whether it's economical or environmental, or it could be both. So the first one is, a supervisor tells an employee in his department that she can have a raise if she sleeps with him. Sounds crazy, right? But it happens, believe me. So do you think this is environmental or economical or both? This one is economical. That's when an employee refuses a supervisor's sexual advances, which causes the supervisor to negatively alter the employee's working hours. This one could be a little bit of both, right? Environmental and economical. Use of sexually provocative or obscene language. So that would be the environment, right? So that's the environment that the employee is working in. And lastly, continuous sexual propositions to an employee, even without directly tying the employee's response to advance of employment. That would be environmental. you all. Let's move on. So let's talk about examples of physical or sexual harassment. Some of the obvious ones are touching, pinching, patting, grabbing. Patting, you know, at the college I worked at, you know, it's quite common for coaches to do that to the players. They'll pat them on the butt or so. Well, I just want to make people aware what might be okay or perceived as okay may not be when that relationship is changed, right? My experience is HR, and I think some of you will agree that what might have seemed okay or the person never complained about throughout the years of employment at a certain company, all of a sudden when they're terminated or there's a separation in the relationship, then that is not okay, and they might bring that up and file a case against you guys. So you want to be careful about that. As supervisor manager, you want to be able to get ahead of it rather than be reactive to it. Brushing against or poking an employee's body. Sometimes it's unavoidable if it's a small area and it's a one-off incident. You know, so be aware. You know, is the employee just being very sensitive, or is this truly something that's a targeted, you know, incident? Hazing or initiation involves sexual component, requiring an employee to wear sexually suggestive clothing. So be careful about that. Sexual harassment could be the obvious unwanted intercourse, kissing, self-exposure, talking about sexual fantasies, writing love letters. Again, this is not Match.com, or, you know, unless your company is like that, you know, this is not a place to write love letters to other colleagues. Displaying pornographic pictures, sexual devices, objects. You know, I love it when employees, you know, claim that, oh, I didn't know I was just using my smartphone to access my personal email, and my friend sent an attachment and it popped up. Well, you are still in a work environment, and somebody else might have viewed it and seen it as offensive, so it is your responsibility. Sexual comments, jokes, gestures, anything that suggests derogatory, insulting, or obscene language, considered harassment as well. You have verbal harassment, which is the name calling, sexually explicit jokes, talking about an individual's anatomy, hair, and or dress. Questions and comments about personal sexual practices. This next one, I used to experience this a lot with retail industries, where they would call them sweetie or boy, or hey gorgeous, that was a common one, or hey beautiful. Sometimes it's in terms of endearment, but again, you never know what's going to happen, how they take it, or it might surface back to you once that separation of an employment relationship happens, correct? So there might be verbal abuse, or there might be cell phone ringtones, right? Some song lyrics, although people have freedom of speech as artists, the workplace is still expected to be a professional environment, and you have every right as an employer to enforce that. There's examples of visual harassment, sexual or offensive pictures, you know, having a calendar of men or women in bikinis, obscene letters or invitations, sending somebody's anatomy, leering, you know, the elevator eyes. I'm sure some of you are probably smiling to yourself thinking you may have experienced or seen somebody do that. So be aware of that. Objects with racially charged significance, unwanted love letters, notes, inappropriate emails, and internet messages. So be aware of that as well. There's two examples of visual harassment. Maybe to one individual, this is harmless, right? It might be a rock band or what have you. To somebody else, it's could be seen as racist or threatening about violence, right? With some of the individuals who want to harass, if you can recognize them. And then there's this other one, right? I mean, if you guys remember the Washington Redskins, that used to be the team name, and it's been changed because that was perceived to be offensive to individuals at that certain group. So, good example of visual harassment there. What is harassment? So, I'm sorry, what is discrimination? So, discrimination is an unlawful employment where you cannot make personal decisions based on any of the protected class status we talked about. So these could include decisions impacting the employment status of the company. whether they're selected to hire, throughout the whole life cycle, right? Any promotions, trainings, settings, compensation, uh, giving certain people time off over another, making shift to scheduled assignments. So you want to be careful about it, because even though you might not be outrightly discriminating against an individual, it could be perceived when it seems to favor that one group over the other. The two types of discrimination are adverse impact. So one that obviously impacts their employment relationship. On the surface it appears neutral. The other one is just disparate treatment, where there's a favorable treatment of one group over another. Okay, typically those belonging in a protected class. I'm going to use protected class a lot because that is the key. And if you familiarize yourself with those in a protected class, there are things that could be considered not professional, not common sense, but they not be, in a protected class listed. One of the statements I should have mentioned this earlier. One of the statements I like to use in these type of trainings is that it's not the intention, it's the impact. Okay, and I heard that years ago, and it made a big impact on me. Actually, it's not the intentions, it's the impact. Nobody knows what your intentions are. It's going to be whatever the impact is on the individual, right? So keep that in mind. Harassment technology, social media is great. I mean, it makes the world connected. You communicate with folks, rekindle friendships from years ago. But also can be historic proof of something you did wrong in a harassing manner. So it can be recovered. IT can be pretty savvy. They can go back, or somebody might have taken a screenshot. Snapchat is very common. My wife uses it a lot. So it's a 6-second timer, and then the picture is gone, right? However, somebody else who views it can actually take a screenshot of it on their phone. So if you're wearing offensive material, clothing, or if you're, talking about a colleague or coworker, I hate my boss, I hate my manager, et cetera, I hate the company, be careful. I mean, it might come back to bite you. Think carefully before you send digital messages that may be inappropriate or offensive. There's an example I'll share with you. This actually really happened back in 2012. There was a CEO who was given a severance agreement. And in that severance, he was awarded $10 million. And the individual was, I think, on his retirement age and did not really want to go back and look for a job again in the workplace. So they decided that they'll take the severance and go travel. So he goes home and he shares this news with his daughter, who I believe was 13 at the time, and his wife. And the daughter's really excited, so she goes to Facebook and she posts, "Yay, the Johnson family," I'm just making this name up, by the way, "the Johnson family won $10 million. We're going to Europe. All expenses paid," or something like that. Well, guess what happened to that severance pay? Somebody found out. Even though her dad was told that she was posting this message, asked her to delete it immediately, somebody had taken a screenshot of it, and guess what? There was no travel. That $10 million gone. So this actually happened, and when I heard about it through an attorney who was telling the story, I was shocked that people don't use common sense. But it happens. Social media is out there. Just be careful about it. So we're going to move on from this. So does it have to happen at the workplace? Absolutely not. It could be at a company work site, could be at a customer's work site. Often in sales, when they're closing a deal, could be any other location where they're representing the company. Another common one is that you could be off the clock, or your employees could be off the clock, and you as a manager invite everybody to celebrate something, some achievement or something of that sort, and you are going to happy hour with your team. Well, in my experience, things happen when people drink, and for those who are not careful with how much they're drinking, you as a manager are going to be responsible for anything that might be conducted that could be harassing or discriminatory in nature, because you are there, you're representing the company. You're not off the clock. So just be careful about that. We talked about unwelcome behavior and sexual harassment. So what is unwelcome behavior? The obvious one is employees complaining and telling you, "Hey, I do not appreciate X, Y, and Z behavior, them asking me out, them doing this, whatever it is. It could be a verbal response of that individual. You could witness that as a manager, supervisor, or employee. Or maybe they're not responding. Maybe that they might be intimidated, depending on who they are as an individual, right? So that could also be unwelcome, though. However, maybe expression changes, in their facial expressions, body language. The person might be getting uptight, they're getting nervous, hands shaking, or there's avoidance. They're completely avoiding that certain individual, working on projects with them, talking to them, any interaction with them at all. So these could all be examples indicating unwelcome behavior. Who could be potential harassers? Anybody. Anybody in the workplace, work environment could be a potential harasser. The employer can be liable if they knew or should have known about the harassment and failed to stop it. I'll give you another example. Those of you who might be watching football, college football actually, years ago there was this case about Jerry Sandusky and Joe Paterno in University of Pennsylvania, I believe. And what a legacy, and amazing coach, right? Decades and decades, his team just adored him. Even those who had graduated and moved on, they still kept in touch with him because he's such an amazing coach and mentor to them. But look what happened, and what a way to tarnish his legacy. He just decided to look the other way when this terrible act was taking place during summer boys camp, apparently. So the employer was held liable, and it was a sad case because no one knows if it's linked or not. But 6 months later, then he ended up, after being shamed in the media and having everything out and exposed, he had a heart attack. It's something to think about. How it does affect individuals, and just because you're not involved, turning the other cheek could be equally as guilty. So who is the victim? Well, you have those who witnessed the behavior could be the victim. Now, although it's not intended to me, I witnessed it happen, so I could be a victim. And the obvious, right? Someone who's the target of that behavior, harassing or discriminatory nature. You want to be careful about environments where people, make jokes, and you want to encourage camaraderie, and you want people to get along in your team. But when the jokes could be something that are considered offensive by another person, you may never know. You may never know what that person's background is, who they might have a relationship with, belonging in that certain category that is being joked about. So that third person might be affected as well and could be a victim. Who's liable? Well, in a quid pro quo environment, employers could be liable when that employee suffers a tangible employment action, right? Because maybe the hours are cut, the position, the change of position, location, et cetera, because of that supervisor's conduct. Supervisors could be liable in a quid pro quo, which basically means this for that, or hostile environment, when they have engaged in or failed to respond or monitor the complaints. Again, I mentioned this earlier, as managers and supervisors, you are the frontline defense of the company. You're the agent of the company. You are a steward of the company. So you are held at a higher standard and behavior under the law. We'll look at some different relationships in terms of harassment. So in the relationship when it's from a supervisor to an employee, and let's say that tangible employment actions such as a quid pro quo has occurred, then the employer would have liability as vicarious liability, right? Because they're the ones who are expected to provide a safe environment and train them, supervisors, etc. When the relationship is supervisor to employee and it's a hostile environment type of harassment, there could be vicarious liability to the employer, but it could be subjected to affirmative defense. Affirmative defense could be, hey, I provide training to all my managers and supervisors, and we have a handbook policies, and we do take these cases seriously. So, we would not allow this type of behavior to continue, and we didn't know about it, something like that. In a relationship where it's from one employee to another and it's a hostile environment is a claim of the harassment, the employer could be liable if they knew or should have known and failed to act. So should have known, how do you prove that, right? Well, if you don't have trainings, luckily for you guys, it provides the trainings. If you don't have a handbook policy that's up to date, if you're not distributing that policy and have acknowledgement receipts signed by employees, individuals in the organization, right? So you can claim, well, I train everybody. We talk about it at company meetings. We have these receipts. People know they should come to us, and they never came to us. That would be one way you can avoid it. But if you can't prove that documentation part of it, if you're not doing these trainings, then they're going to look at, well, you should have known. In a customer vendor type relationship, and let's say it's a hostile environment type of harassment, the employer could be liable if, again, he knew or should have known and failed to act. So we'll look at different statements, and if I can again ask for your participation and give me a break from talking. So in this, let's talk about which type of harassment do you feel this is. Samuel is Melanie's manager. They are working together on a project. Samuel has asked Melanie to dinner to discuss their work. After dinner, she says, perhaps we collaborate well on this project. I can make things easy for you at your next evaluation. His tone of voice insinuates what he means by collaborate. Okay. What type of harassment do you feel? You can go ahead and use the chat feature and type in the answers. I'll give you a couple of minutes. So that would be quid pro quo, right? If you do this for me, then I'll make that easier for you. Next one is Peter and Josh work at a manufacturing facility that employs people of all races and ethnicities. The supervisor there continually refers to the Latino employees as beaners. Peter and Josh are white, but have complained several times to management about the offensive language. Management says they can't do anything until Latino employee complains. I'm not telling you guys have heard that, but I have actually heard this before. So this will be the hostile work environment, right? The employers creating a hostile work environment for individuals. Next one is John, who is 54, works for a high-profile tech company. He receives excellent reviews, often calls slow, sluggish, fuddy-duddy behind his back. And after working there for a year, he's fired for not being a good cultural fit. This also would be a hostile work environment, right? Because you're creating a hostile work environment for John. Lastly, during a meeting with Carmelita, the boss says, why don't you wear shorter skirts like those women lawyers on TV? You're an attractive gal. I think if you showed your legs off a little, the customers would be happier and I'd be happier. A little dedication on your part can go a long way here. Some of you probably are rolling your eyes thinking, does this really happen? Is it common sense? Believe me, it happens. Many clients where this has been shared before. This is a hostile work environment. The employee could complain and say you're creating a hostile work environment because you're harassing me based on this. Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about bullying. So bullying is something that isn't new, but is a new topic that has been coming up. Here's some important, interesting stats about bullying, which is another form of harassment. 28% of employers, according to Workplace Bullying Institute, are unaware that it's happening. 23% are aware, 21% have witnessed it, 20% have actually been bullied, and 7% are currently bullied. So just to go show you that this is a serious topic, it's happening. And actually, Assembly Bill 2053 went in effect of January 2015, where it requires anti-bully training for employers to include that and how to train supervisors in the prevention of abusive conduct. This is a serious topic. Some of it can lead to tragedies. I know a lot of you watch the news. You see this happening in schools, where bullying, unfortunately, of kids to a certain particular kid for whatever reason, this is something very tragic and sad. In the workplace, it could be, tragic as well, and it could be also workplace violence, and a lot of times workplace violence, there has been the trigger point of why these individuals committed such acts. Here's some examples of abusive conduct. It could be repeated. It could be derogatory remarks, insults against a certain person, background, etc. Verbal, or it could be physical. It could undermine work or performance of the individual. And the single act does not have to be abuse unless it is severe and egregious. Here's different types of bullies. So you have your substance abuse bully in the workplace. So depending on what substance they're abusing, right, they might be a bully. You have your opportunistic bully. This is a bully who commits the act only because of an opportunity to do so. Typically, they are affiliated with somebody in a position of power who are presenting the opportunity. So if leadership steps in and sets the tone and doesn't allow the opportunity to be present, they can minimize that type of behavior. You have your chronic bully on the far left, which is very dangerous, somebody who's very mean and manipulative and does it over and over again simply because they can. And on the bottom, you have an accidental bully. This would be somebody who's completely unaware that they're bullying somebody. They might think it's a joke. They might think, again, it's not my intention. I didn't mean to do this. I'm so sorry. So, but it does happen. Here's some examples of bullying. So there's verbal examples where somebody could be spreading rumors, right, about other individuals. It could be insults, something that the individual might have done that, causes embarrassment to them. It could be teasing. Big one, right? Physical. Could be hitting, kicking, pushing, taking or damaging their belongings, their computer, sabotaging their car, slashing the tire. Cyberbullying, text, social media. Even though, again, it's after hours, it's on their own personal account, on Facebook or what have you. If it impacts the workplace, it is going to impact and force the employer to take action. It can be social exclusion. Individuals or a team gets together, a clique is formed, and they are purposely excluding a certain individual. Let's say inviting you to lunch or maybe getting together after work, and you're just excluding that one person all the time. Worst management does it when they're doing this. Obviously, hey, we're going to a team event because of this. A question was asked before, well, what if we know, for example, we're going for happy hour and we're going for, maybe a drink just to celebrate, whatever it is, and we know that person doesn't drink or it's against the religion to drink. Well, if it's happening over and over and you're choosing places only to celebrate, you want to be mindful of that. And if you want to avoid this type of environment, then you want to be aware of the person who also does not drink. Have options where, you are not excluding individuals purposefully and make it, something that's voluntary as well. It could be culture, right? So based on someone's ethnicity or language, it could be their accents. That's a big one. So that exists quite a bit. It's important to know when it's just a conflict versus when it's actual bullying. So conflict it actually could be healthy, right? It's a disagreement that happens when people view things differently, or want things differently. And both these people typically have the power to solve the problem. It involves them directly. It could be working on a project. It could be working on trying to close a deal on a sale. It could be working on, anything else as a team. But both people involved have the power to solve the problem. And in these situations, they both want control to win the situation, but not at the expense of hurting someone else. That's usually not the main goal. It could be friendly competitions, as an example. It becomes bullying when one has perceived power over that other person. I have power to do this, so, or the intent is to hurt, control, embarrass, or through the other person. And it could often be a repeated situation. So 5 steps to handle bullying. As managers and supervisors, hopefully you're already doing this, is that you're constantly observing your team when you're managing it. Half the job is to do whatever it is that you're title you're holding, but the other half is to manage your team, right? And so you're always looking, taking, making attention of anything that you notice that is not appropriate. So if someone comes and tells you this is what's happening, evaluate the situation. Is it really bullying, or is the person being really sensitive? Right? Is a reasonable person standard? Is this going to be considered offensive to any other person in a similar type situation? Once that's done, encourage employees to stand up for themselves. Company, when you have new hires, use these events to go ahead and share with the employees that you always have an open door, talk to you when things happen, that the employer does not tolerate this type of action or conversation, that you will address it immediately if it happens. So let's say somebody's presented a situation to you, and what do, right? Well, number one thing is to document. Document. The one thing you take away from it, two things, is the intention, not the impact. I love that phrase. And the other one is to document. Document whatever is happening, because even if something hasn't happened, that could show that someone can claim discrimination or worse, let's say it's a performance evaluation that is not favor them, they can claim, well, this is the reason why, right? So your documentation will help. Document the situation, when this happened, you might need to do maybe a simple investigation or more formal investigation. You might want to get superiors involved, depending on how severe the accusation could be. And once that has been resolved, you want to move on from that. You want to tell the employees to move on from that, encourage them that this is a safe working environment, that, you want to foster a healthy work environment for individuals, but follow up with those individuals involved. Everybody has good intentions, right? So realize sometimes it could be somebody unaware, and maybe their intentions, and they're claiming their intentions as such. In a conflict situation, people are not necessarily trying to be bullies, right? So we talked about conflict, and when it's a conflict, when it's a bully. You want to resist the urge to solve the problem. Sometimes people just want to have you hear whatever issue is going on. If as a manager observing any, email chains back and forth, you want to encourage in-person conversations. Those usually clear the air. And if you have to take a side, right? If you see a project, one side is saying it's going to go poorly because of whatever action the other person is taking, the other person defends it, and they have a good ground for it, then sure, take a side at that point. The side that wants the greatest results. And then evangelize your philosophy about conflict, right? That you do not tolerate it, to be healthy, nobody has to lose here, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go back to you guys once more. This is behavior bullying. So somebody who's expressing differences of opinion. We're going to use the chat feature. Oops. Let's go back one. So someone who's expressing their different opinions, simply, that's not bullying. Someone's offering constructive feedback, guidance, or advice about work-related behavior. Right? So this is performance review sessions, something, an event where you actually get to talk to somebody about their policy violation or performance issues. That would not be considered bullying as well. Intimidating somebody. That could be, right, depending on what type of intimidation is taking place. And constantly changing work guidelines for no reason. It could be. Sometimes there could be a true company business need to change the work guidelines. But if you're doing with the intention to have them fail, right, you're setting them up to fail, it could be bullying. Let's talk about the impact of harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Signs of harassment. So there's many signs of harassment that around you. Sometimes it could be attendance problems, right? So the person is experiencing so much harassment that they just don't want to show up to work. They're fearful of what the next day is going to bring. Or maybe they're avoiding that certain person we talked about. Maybe the performance, they were great in the beginning or during the employment, and then something, for whatever reason, their performance is severely impacted negatively. Or they could be moody and irritable. They're being really short with you. So you want to be able to ask them, have an open door policy, find out what's going on. Ask them if they're okay. And remember, document this. So harassment can have a lot of negative effects, right? It could be offensive, hostile work environment. It could be expensive if somebody leaves, and think about replacing that position with the turnover, the cost of the hours it takes to screen resumes if you're using recruiting agencies, or maybe if there's a claim, a lawsuit against you, right? So all this ties into financials. It promotes poor morale, right? Other team members might view this and see, be impacted negatively. Legal fees with attorneys, the negative publicity about the company, safety issues, right? So it might be unsafe work area where one individual feels, threatened, and they might react in a similar manner. It prohibits high performance and limits productivity. It may cause turnover, as we mentioned, and the training, right, of new employees. Ultimately, the damage, we talked about some of the examples I've shared with you, is the damage to the reputation of that individual or their entire organization and management team. Some of the effects of harassment on victims are that it could cause psychological damage. They might have trauma. There was, I remember I had a client who had, and one employee who had developed feelings, intimate feelings for another employee, and they would leave the notes everywhere. And everywhere this other employee looked, that person seemed to be there. So they're looking out the window, the person is right there, waving hi, coincidentally at the same time. One of the other events that happened is that they were stopped at the red light, and the person happened to be right in front of them, and they popped out of the window just to say hi. That person actually went, believe it or not, some psychological trauma because of it. They started having nightmares that this person is popping up everywhere. So it can have psychological damage on the individual. Self-esteem issues, right? So somebody might be questioning what their self-worth is, questioning that. They could feel powerless. I can't control this. There's nothing the organization is going to do about it. It's a terrible situation, and it might affect them in that manner. It might affect their professional development. So if they're not performing well, right? So they're not growing with the organization, and might cause health issues like the trauma incident that I mentioned with you. So why do people behave badly at work, right? You hire people, you expect them to do a good job. Why does this happen? Why does it keep happening? Hey, I didn't know that was inappropriate. Or everyone here does it, right? So everyone is doing it, so I thought it's okay to do so. Maybe they have a family culture, their own individual bias, right, to do so. I was only joking. It's not meant to do any harm. I didn't mean any harm. It's not my intention. Well, hey, I have a pretty thick skin. I don't find that offensive, so why should they? Somebody's just going to doesn't want to be held accountable. They have 100 million excuses for it, but taking responsibility for their own actions. Here's some statistics by the for California by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So they released a report of enforcement litigation statistics for 2012 about sexual harassment. When the charge of files were down, percentages of men filing charges has increased. So there were 6,363 cases in California in 2014. 32 of those cases went to litigation. There was $9.7 million awarded in legal settlements, 8.2 million in mediation and affirmative relief. 17.5% of the cases were filed by men, which was an increase of 6.2% in the last 15 years. Some interesting stats for you. There's an average of 450 employment lawsuits filed daily. California, which is the most litigious state, great place to do business, right? Great weather, but it has a lot of employment laws too, which protect employees. California leads the nation in employment law claims. When sued, the company loses the case typically more than 50% of the time. For the first time ever, as some of the other charts I mentioned earlier showed, federal and state, retaliation or complaints of retaliation have surpassed race-based complaints by filed at the EEOC. So people are aware of their rights. People are advocating for their rights. They're filing cases against organizations and with the EEOC. And the EEOC actually has multiplied significantly the number of agents out in the field to address this. So what is retaliation, right? Any adverse action taken against an employee because he or she complained of the harassing behavior or discrimination. It could include any impact to the employment relationship, any negative performance reviews, or it could be a change in job duties or shift have, or any other actions such as assault, unfounded civil or criminal charges are likely to prevent those reasonable people from pursuing their rights. Companies should have a zero toleration policy for retaliation, right? So zero retaliation. What that means is that basically you want to ensure the employees that they will not experience retaliation for simply reporting harassment, and that other employees will not retaliate against individuals for making a complaint, or would be subjected to, otherwise they would be subjected to disciplinary action. And you should take this very seriously because you want to foster a culture that is safe and healthy, and again, encourage people to come to you when something like this happens versus filing a case elsewhere. So retaliation is forbidden by anyone, by you, by the harasser, by any of the supervisor, coworker, against any person who's complaining of the harassment or participating in investigations. So even those who might be witnesses to an investigation that's pending are protected in retaliation or from retaliation. And also against an innocent employee to punish someone else simply for complaining, provided the two of them have a close relationship. So when a retaliation claim is brought forward to you, to succeed in that, the employee must prove the following, right? That he or she suffered an adverse action, such as they were terminated because of retaliation for filing a complaint or harassment, etc. That they engaged in protected activity, such as what I mentioned, and that the protected activity and the action against the adverse action against them were linked. Right? So because I complained about witnessing this happen to this individual, I was demoted or terminated from my position. So to avoid a retaliation lawsuit, you must educate yourself and your employees about retaliation. People are protected. You want to provide a confidential way for them to make a complaint. Doesn't have to be a formal way. It doesn't have to be where they have to write something. It is your responsibility as a supervisor, manager, employer to take that complaint of retaliation or harassment and discrimination. You want to make it clear that retaliation is not going to be tolerated, that they may be subjected to disciplinary action up to and including termination. If you fail to act in a retaliation suit is brought against you, then you can be held liable as well. So you want to take care when dealing with employees to avoid anything that could be perceived as retaliation, right? You want to follow up and check up with employees. Let's say you did an investigation and whatever act, and whatever outcome was expected was communicated. You want to make sure you're following up to make sure that people are still protected, that nobody's retaliated against them, etc. I know I mentioned this before, but you have to document. And a lot of attorneys will share the same. A lot of HR professionals say that time and time again. You want to document because you want to protect your decision for an employment related decision to an employee, right? So I did not give them a raise this year because based on my review that I have documented, they were performing well. There's been performance issues. You've given them warnings, you've had complaints, you take disciplinary action. Any of these things, you want to have documentation to have your ducks in a row, to have a paper trail. You could very well have somebody, file a claim against you and say, oh, I was terminated or I didn't get the promotion because they're discriminating against me because of X, Y, and Z. Well, if you have the documentation, then chances are you have a pretty strong case to showing that you have just cause to take whatever action is necessary. There's no expectation or requirement for you as an employer to give special treatment to an employee who's filed a complaint, or to make sure any discipline taken matches the offense and is in line with how they wanted or they perceive the outcome to have happened, right? So as an employer, you have a complainant come to you and has an accusation, and what they're expecting is, oh, I want them terminated. It doesn't work like that, right? Depending on what the situation is, what facts you have uncovered, might be just a verbal warning, might be something they didn't know the policy was. So it might be something very minor, or it could be pervasive where something more egregious has happened. So are there any defenses for these employers? Sure. You have to show that you provided periodic sexual harassment training, such as this one, to your supervisors. That the employee did not suffer a tangible employment action. You must prove that you exercise reasonable care to prevent and promptly correct the harassment. And the employer unreasonable failed to report the harassment, otherwise avoid harm. Right? So the employee can file a case and they may want a certain outcome, and they may not be happy with the outcome, and then hold the employer liable in a lawsuit. And if you've communicated your policy, you have training with your managers and supervisors, if you have your handbook policies updated, if you distributed with them, have you have team meetings talked about it, and still somebody fails to come and file a complaint against you, or follow the proper channels of a complaint procedure, that could be a good defense. Because at some point, if you've done your due diligence as an employer to provide a safe and healthy work environment for your employees, the courts will look upon that favorably. So when it comes to coaching managers about this topic, right, about harassment, why are some managers so reluctant to do it? Well, because maybe they've never done it before, or maybe they're just not, they feel they're not good at it. It's an uncomfortable thing to talk about. So in those instances, as an employer, reach out to your managers, supervisors, team them up with the HR professionals from AlphaStaff to help guide them and coach them in these conversations. It might seem a little awkward and uncomfortable at first, but they'll get easier as time goes on and as they handle more of these. They might be worried about being accused themselves, right? So depending on the type of situation it is, you might want a witness present. Why are some employees hesitating to report harassment? Well, because they don't want to go against what is majority. Might be embarrassing to them, right? Maybe the person who's the harasser is very likable, or maybe very strong in sales or performing for the company. That's embarrassing, right? To go against them. Might be humiliating for them also, or for their families. They're worried about losing their job, right? Or any retaliation. It doesn't surprise me, but still I find people feel that they feel like they have to walk around eggshells and continue to ignore a certain act of harassment and discrimination because they might lose their job. Let's talk about prevention for harassment. So the first thing we can do to prevent harassment is having a clearly written company policy. If you don't have one, please get with your HR folks. to make sure your policy is updated, have acknowledgement and receipt of that policy that is recorded in the personnel files. That's the first step you could do. And have a proactive management style, right? Rather than reactive. Have these trainings, have these company meetings where you're, again, communicating the zero tolerance policy, et cetera, et cetera. The policy that you have should be that harassment is legal and will not be tolerated. Have zero tolerance. Have some alternative complaint processes. For example, not just to the supervisor, maybe go to a certain point of contact, and then go to somebody higher up, and another step up if you have a big enough organization. You want to be able to have people comfortable with taking the complaint elsewhere if they feel that it hasn't been handled appropriately. Or in worst cases, one of the people identified is the harasser. You want to take immediate disciplinary action against anyone who violates the policy. You want to have a confidentiality statement where, unless those who are part of the investigation, et cetera, that you will not talk about this as an employer, a manager, or supervisor to others in the organization, or where come back to the employer who was affected by it. You can have a clear understanding and definition of harassment for all your employees. You can have examples of appropriate conduct, listed in your maybe offices, in your workplace bulletin area. Have a good investigation procedure. If you're not comfortable with investigating, your HR folks again from AlphaStaff can help you with this. Have a statement about anti-retaliation. As you can see, lastly, but definitely not the least, it's one of the number one reasons people are filing cases with the EEOC. So here's one, the no-touch policy, right? How do you feel about being touched at work? There are people who are huggers, right? There's a definition right here. In the U.S., you should grant your coworkers about 1 to 2 feet of personal space, right? So use that to guide you in your common sense, then you'll be able to ensure that this no-touch policy is being enforced. And what might seem okay now, and you can't predict things, right? You may never know what might be not okay once that separation of relationship has happened. So you want to look for guidance from HR professionals. I'm sure they will all share this information with you to err on the side of caution, right? So the importance of training and education. It provides information that you may not have received. Some of you may not have known retaliation is number one case. So maybe this is information that you already have, but it's a refresher. It does create awareness of the pain and some of the harassment that still continue on workplaces. And then also to inform and identify that you managers and supervisors, you play a critical role, not just as the frontline defense, but you set the tone, right? As leaders, right? You practice what you preach, and it'll filter down to your team. Why supervisors train, apart from the legal obligation, is because you're directly in contact with the employees, right? You're dealing with them day to day. You represent the employer, steward of the company. You are held liable for harassment by supervisors. Employees are strictly held liable for harassment by a supervisor. And you have a legitimate power, right, to control an employee's employment relationship at that company. It's important to maintain trust, and it's critical to have that to succeed in your career, in your teams, as organizations, with leadership and businesses. You want the business to grow. You want the bottom line to be impacted positively and not negatively. All the stuff we talked about takes away from that. A severe lawsuit, God forbid, can severely cripple the bottom line, and all of a sudden, maybe layoffs are happening. Maybe benefits are taken away. Maybe we can't give raises the next year. Those type of tangible things, which may be a big motivator to a lot of your employees, might be taken away from them. Might lose key employees, right? So those types of things, you want to be able to make sure that you're fostering an environment that's built on trust, because you want people to come to you first. You want people to discuss these issues with you because you want to get ahead of it. You want to take action. You want to look at somebody who does take action and does something about these things. So you want to have proactive management, right? And what does that mean? Well, you're somebody who does the change, who tends to initiate the change rather than always reacting. You always be reactive to these issues as they happen, right? So that's proactive management. And if you look at your own, some of how you reacted to some of these things in the past, so what did you do when it comes to discrimination and harassment? Did you wait for an event to happen and then react to it? Or are you proactively providing training to your team, your fellow, if you supervise another manager or supervisor, if you're making sure that people have the policies and they're updated as an organization, what are you doing, right? So that's proactive management. This does happen in the workplace, sadly. People gossip, people gossip about the two things hopefully people are not gossiping about, but does happen anyway, are religion and politics. Hopefully they're not doing that because there can be two very strong sides opposing each other, correct? So that type of conversation, in my experience, has no place in the workplace, especially, or about someone's sexuality. You know, oh, they just had a gender transition, or their relationships. You know, oh, this person is going out with this person in the organization. All this could be a form of sexual harassment. Oops, I keep saying that. Okay. You can't control anyone else's actions or behavior or what comes out of their mouth, right? You can only control yourself, okay? And set the tone. As managers and supervisors, set the tone. So be careful about, you know, what jokes you are sharing or participating in, what type of gossip that you are contributing to, you know. So be aware of your participation in all this, right? Don't say or do anything that might be construed as inappropriate. Here's an interesting one: inappropriate dress in the workplace. So what do you do, right? So what do you do if you have an employee that is dressed inappropriately? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that, is it really inappropriate, right? Are you discriminating based on a protected category? Are they wearing something that could be a religious garb, right? So are you discriminating based on religion? So you want to make sure that there's the legal part of it, that you're not discriminating in any way. Second, you want to acknowledge it and you want to have a meeting about it. So if somebody is dressed inappropriately, clothing is too tight, too revealing, etc., things like that, too offensive, you want to have a meeting about it. And my recommendation is to have a witness present. Hopefully, if you're a manager, have an HR person present, or another manager, somebody hired, right? So serve as a witness in case you don't want it to turn it into to turn out as a sexual harassment case against you because you addressed that inappropriate, offensive clothing. So you want to have the meeting, right? And then you also in the meeting, you want to tell them that you don't want to defend them, that you want to educate them, and you want to be sensitive to them, but that this has to be addressed. And once you point it out, wait for the reaction, see what they say. Ask them, well, how do you plan to fix this? Might be something simple where they live close by. Oh, I'll go change right now. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. I'm going to go change. All right, great. Problem taken care of. Or maybe they live too far. You know what? I'm sorry. I didn't know. I apologize. I didn't mean any harm. I promise I won't do this again. Go on that good faith of that person, right? So let them work the rest of the day. And then in an ideal world, they will not do this again. If you do, then obviously then you have to maybe use progressive discipline for violating dress policy at the workplace. So the key is to, you have to get ahead of it. You have to, when it's brought to your attention, you do have to take action. And you're not expected to be a babysitter and monitor your employee every day once you talk to them, but we're all professionals, we're all grown-ups. Give them some benefit of doubt that they'll exercise good judgment next time. but at least do your due diligence to talk about it, to document that conversation and that meeting and the witness. So in case this happens again, you could lean back to that. What is considered offensive at work? Well, according to employees who were surveyed, 32% of them overwhelmingly considered sex talk to be offensive. Anything relating to sex, right? Considered offensive. 28% of them considered sex actions to be offensive. And 30% of them considered the actual touching of any form to be offensive at work. So just be mindful of that. So here's a question for all of you out there. Is asking somebody out on a date considered harassment? I'll go ahead and wait for your responses. If you can go ahead and type that into the chat feature, if you can. No, asking somebody out on a date is not considered harassment. However, remember, sexual harassment term is when it's unwelcome, when it's repeated also, right? So asking over and over again, you know, again, I tell people this is not Match.com. You know, this is not the environment for it. You have to hire for one reason and one reason only. To be mindful of that. What would you say to your employees if you find that they are dating? Can you prevent them from dating? Can you really? Could you really have a policy against? You know, I don't expect you to date, right? If you really have that, well, this could probably be deterrence, but no, you cannot. You can't control what people do outside of work. Remember, a lot of these people spend half their daily hours awake in the workplace. So things can happen. You know, if there's a relationship in a workplace, let's say supervisor and employee, then I would ask as an employer for you to remove that yourself from that supervisor position if you're supervising that employee or have influence over a decision of that employee's working relationship in the company. Okay. Remember, things can also happen when things don't work out, right? So you want to remind those individuals who are involved that hired for one reason and one reason only, and it's do that job, and nothing else should impact that. So let's say somebody breaks up, and my experience is usually one person who's not happy, right? Maybe the other person is a terrible, terrible scumbag and did something really sleazy or dirty and did a lot of wrong to somebody. Well, those are some of the things that happen with dating. Unfortunately, ethically, is it good? No, it's not. Maybe they're a terrible person, but they're hired for one reason and one reason only. Again, right? It should not impact their day-to-day job. Okay, so let's talk about stopping inappropriate behavior. So what is the most effective thing you as supervisors and managers can do to stop inappropriate behavior? Well, you set the tone. You control your own actions. We just talked about it, right? So you control only what you say, what you do. And from that, you'll set a tone. Have a zero tolerance policy. You know, be proactive. Use the proactive management method we talked about. Reach out to employees. Be a visible manager. Don't wait for things to happen and be reactive, right? Be an example. Let's talk about some of the measures you can take, actions you can take to address this. So when an employee complains, you want to respond immediately. There is no project, no task that is so important that you cannot stop and take an employee's complaint. It doesn't matter how serious seems or how minor it seems to you, it's important for you to respond immediately. If at the very least, stop what you're doing and at least address the complaint and document it. Again, it's not their responsibility to provide it in writing to you. If they do, then that's great. That's coming from their own words. Oops, find this a little bit. Yeah, so, if they do, that's great, but the ultimate responsibility is on you as a supervisor. So document everything. What happens when you wait, hey, I'm trying to finish this project, but the CEO, the CFO needs it. I'm trying to get home to my wife and kids or whatever it is. Why don't we meet, over the weekend? Or why don't we meet, next week? A lot of things can happen from now and then, depending on what the harassing behavior is, right? Maybe some violent act could act. Maybe that person gets so upset, they react in a violent manner because the company's not doing anything and the company's not taking it seriously. Or maybe when they come to you and they do follow up or you follow up with them, there are details they forget, right? Because people get in shock depending on how severe the issue might be. They might forget and the details are missed, and those details might make or break a case. So you want to respond immediately and take the complaint very seriously. You want to be fair and impartial, right? Because as human beings first, we tend to gravitate towards whoever makes the complaint first, right? So remind yourself, there's always two sides to the story, right? It takes two hands to clap. Don't promise confidentiality because there's other witnesses. If they've shared with you, well, I was there in the lunchroom and this happened, and there happens to be people present at the same time, when you're fact finding about what time this occurred, you may have to involve those other witnesses. You want to be supportive, right? Put them at ease, taking a step back to when you're documenting, reiterate what they've shared with you. Ask them, have you missed something? Have I missed anything? So you make sure you capture everything and then document that. Depending on how severe this might be, you might need some more time to investigate, or it might be something simple where the person whistled and you approach them and they say, oh, I didn't know, and problem solved, right? But you want to be able to show respect and empathy to both parties. You want to get as much information as possible about the time, the place, again, the witnesses, and what actually happened. And you want to take all that information and you want to report that to HR immediately, right? You want to take care of it as a manager, a supervisor, as an organization. You do not want that person to take it to an outside source. Because for many reasons, again, you want to avoid heavy lawsuits, the financial risks, but you also want to be able to show that you do care about your employees and you do want to foster a healthy working environment for everyone. I think this is a great slide for, we will be, I believe, sharing that. So if you can go ahead and take a screenshot of it, or later on, print this out, or if you're taking notes, I think it's a good reminder to managers and supervisors to put in your handbooks or put in your manuals as well. So what should you say? Here's some examples for those of you who might be new to this or want some tips on how to make it better, or what else to say. First, you want to thank them, right? Thank them for bringing that complaint to them, because it might have been a difficult thing, right? Remember, some people are afraid of losing their job, reporting things. They might be afraid of retaliation. All these things are going on in their minds. So you want to thank them first, and remind them also that before they start that you want to help them, but they may be required by law to investigate this further, so that they know that the investigation might take place. You want to tell them how seriously the company takes harassment and that you will start investigation immediately. And that you will elevate this to the HR department. They will contact you to the investigation. Remind them about confidentiality, right? That you will keep everything about the complaint confidential. And it would be best for them to keep this confidential throughout the investigation. But again, if there's witnesses, you might have to reach out to them as well. So here's some examples of things you should say, or hopefully you are saying. What happens in the case where an employee comes to you and says, oh, you know what, Mr. Manager, Mr. Supervisor, Mr. Manager, Mr. Supervisor, I'm just bringing this to your attention, but I don't want you to do anything yet. What do you do? Right, I'll throw this question out there. Actually, I'd like to hear some of you and your feedback. So what would you do in that situation if your employee comes to you and shares this incident that happened, which is a complaint, but they don't want you to take any action? Or even better yet, they tell you or reassure you that, I'm gonna go ahead and take care of it. I just wanted you to know. What is your responsibility at that point? To ensure confidentiality? Do you not do anything? Do you wait to see how it turned out? What do you do as a supervisor and a manager? So I'll give a couple of minutes to get the response. Oh, how did this change? So typically how I would respond is it's your responsibility again, right? Yes, thank you. Somebody said this, tell them all complaints must be investigated. Absolutely. As soon as they've brought it to your attention, coach will, if this goes the distance, the coach will say, well, you should have known and you failed to act, right? So you need to respond in that manner. Thank you for sharing that. And then explain what happens next, right? So once you've done taking the complaint, and you've said what you need to say, so tell them what happens next. Let them be aware that repeat offenses will be met with harsh discipline up to the institution, right? That the person who's accused, right, and find them to be the harasser or the offender, that they acknowledge that they have done this, that is inappropriate, and they will stop immediately. And that you as an organization are committed to toughen up the punishment for any repeat offenses, right? So be careful about that. That you are explaining to them what the next step is. You are sharing how serious the tone of this situation is, and expressing your commitment as a company. And no, you're not obligated to discuss what the details of discipline were, right? With that person who has been a victim. If they ask you, well, what happened? Did you terminate them? Did you write them up? Well, we just took steps to make sure this doesn't happen again. We found out that this was happening, and thank you for bringing this to our attention once again. This is not going to happen again. I will be following up with you. And remember, always follow up. It might have been something that stopped right then, but you never know, 3 months later, 6 months later, right? Again, the coach might say, well, you should have known and you failed to act. So please follow up with the individual. Okay. Not sure where this is about. Okay, so when is the time to investigate, right? So sometimes, there's a complaint brought against an individual, and how much investigation should you do? So the employer knows or should know a possible violation of the company's policy, right? So you should know your policy better than the individual, especially against harassment discrimination. Whenever there's a complaint about harassment discrimination, whether it's verbal or not, it's written. When an employee supervisor talks to an individual in charge about a problem, but it continually stresses that they are not complaining, right? As in the example I shared with you. When there's new behavior patterns, when there are things like avoidance is happening, person is not showing up to work, attendance, productivity, morale is affected. When an administrative agency begins to inquire into the conditions of the workplace, right, it might be time for you to investigate. And the big one, when a notice of a lawsuit is received, no surprise there. You'll be surprised that companies still fail to act because they feel that, my employees love me and I give great benefits and I pay them really well, and nothing's going to happen. So as I mentioned, there's formal and there's informal investigations. The complaint is a question. When the complaint is a question has a fairly simple answer. then it might be an informal investigation, or whether it's a more complex problem, right? It could involve just the employee, but it might involve other witnesses present who are involved in the situation. It could be repeated. It could be a pattern of the person doing this over a period of time, and now this person has had enough, and they are coming to you. And you may need to get more facts than what they're able to provide. You might need to obviously find out facts and what they're saying is true. If it's a true complaint, what if it's an employee complaining about a supervisor, and you are managing that supervisor, or you're in a higher position authority that the person is being complained, and there's a recent performance review that was done. That's a good one. If you need more information, it's likely because that complaint is requiring a formal investigation where you have to actually lay down who the witnesses were, the time, and any other facts and statements, and then present them to an HR person. The goal is to minimize legal exposure, right? Because legal exposure impacts bottom line. You want to treat employees consistently. You want to make sure that you're not taking a different action or approach with those who are, star talent at the company. They're not lead performers at the company. Regardless of their performance, everyone should be treated fairly and consistently. You want to address the complaints immediately and take immediate action, prompt action to rectify it. Your investigation should be thorough. You should make sure that, if there's any other witnesses that you have taken their statements, reach out to them. And remember, the accused, don't try not to be biased because the individual has brought the complaint first. The accused might be innocent, right? Unless they're proved guilty. Again, there's two sides to every story. We talked about a well-written, published harassment policy. You want us to have a clear procedure for filing a complaint. You have a handbook through us. We've helped you with having a proper complaint procedure, identifying the right individuals. If you don't have a handbook through us, please make sure that you do have one, or reach out to your HR professionals. Make sure that complainants understand that retaliation will not be tolerated. And you want to train every new employee and train them on a regular basis. Some common mistakes that companies make, supervisors and managers make, is that they treat the complaint more like a comment. They don't document the complaint or incident. They're not communicating how serious the issue is, or they're just failing to act or respond, and the problem is not corrected. So, as I mentioned before, you want to review your company policies, make sure they're up to date, that you are distributing the Department of Fair Employment and Housing Act brochure at the time of hire, which talks about sexual harassment, etc. Once you've elevated the complaint, HR will interview all the people involved. They'll collect all the evidence and evaluate all the evidence, the fact-finding part of it, and they'll take appropriate action and recommend certain, make certain recommendations to you. And you want to report and document the findings. So a lot of times what happens in a he said, she said situation where you don't have enough facts to support either way, and you're at a stalemate, it doesn't mean that you cannot take action by having an investigation, by taking the complaint seriously, by documenting this, and having some sort of outcome reported. Well, I did not have enough facts or evidence. You're at least showing that as an organization, as a manager or supervisor, you do take this seriously, and that you are doing something about it. So the next time something happens, people will be able to come to you more freely, and will be open to come to you with any other complaints. Some important application tips, now that we've gone through all this training, is that you want to encourage a productive workplace, right? You want to be fair and respectful of all your employees. You want to be consistent, fair and consistent with everybody, and make decisions based on the individual merit, not for any other reason, any protected categories. You want to focus on the workplace performance and follow established procedures. Again, you are the steward of the company. You want to be, through your actions and words, you want to make it clear that you disapprove and do not tolerate harassment and discrimination, that you are committed as an organization to a respectful workplace. And employees who may be subjected to misconduct, they shouldn't have fear of retaliation. So you want to ensure that you don't have to create that environment. Your behavior does set the tone. I think this is a great one that I've actually used this years ago, and I'm glad that it's included in the slide. So here are some tests you can take for yourselves, and share this with your employees as well in your company. So when you're, some key tips of thinking about how your actions, right? Would you act this way in front of your child? Would you act this way in front of your parent? Or would you want it to be, shared in a major publication, newspaper, where someone else is reading about your behavior, right? So you want to think about these things. I think it's a good indicator of using common sense. As a supervisor, you want to have zero tolerance. I think this is also a very good slide, by the way, that you can maybe post up and have a reminder for yourselves at your workstations as supervisors, managers. So as an action plan, right, have zero tolerance, right? You are responsible for responding immediately. Have zero tolerance for retaliation, for harassment, for discrimination, for bullying, anything that the person is doing apart from what they're hired for. You want to set a good example. You want to set a standard of how to behave, because you want to be looked at as a leader who enforces and engages only in positive. Do not engage in offensive behavior. Investigate and respond to complaints immediately. Make sure your responses are timely and they create solutions for individuals. Again, the outcome might be not something they wanted, but you still want to make sure that you're taking actions and steps to prevent this from happening again. You want to educate your employees. We provide this training for supervisors and managers. There's trainings, there's other resources through your HR account managers at AlphaStaff, you can educate employees with. Promote discussions, conversations, show them examples, team meetings, show videos, maybe case studies. Communicate, what the appropriate behavior and guidelines is required of the company and the individual. So let's do some more exercises as we're getting closer to the hour. You hired a new cashier, Melissa. She's attractive and single. Your other day shift cashier, Mark, also single, had asked her out on a date. Should you intervene? I wouldn't intervene at this point. Again, remember, it's not illegal for somebody to ask somebody else at work out on a date. Melissa said no now, but Mark asked her out again. So no one's complaining. Is this harassment? Well, so I haven't answered not yet based on no. Remember, it could be unwelcome if it's repeated, right? So Melissa might not vocalize that complaint, but again, it's your responsibility as an employer manager to provide a safe, healthy work environment. Remember, something that didn't bother individual at the time might surface later on at a time of separation. Okay? What if Mark is Melissa's immediate supervisor? What changes would you recommend? So if Mark is Melissa's immediate supervisor, I would probably have him remove himself from that supervisory role. That is my recommendation as an HR professional. Because again, there could be perceived discrimination, right? And harassment, I mean, a whole slew of things that can happen. Let's go to the next one. So in how you would respond to this situation. Tom has been with the company for 4 years. He's a great cook and after the organization was outgoing personality. He's always calling women in the restaurant his girl. And he'll give occasionally one of them a big hug. There seems to be a stress relief for everyone in the crap workspace. They enjoy his personality. The atmosphere actually improves when Tom is at work and everyone smiles. This is not a problem, is it? Do you think it's a problem? Nobody's complaining about it. Do you think it's a stress relief? It's a crap workspace. How would you respond to that? Great. Thank you for sharing. So somebody said you would advise against hugs and use of girl. Yeah, absolutely. Again, you don't know what you don't know. Because right now nobody's complaining, but again, you never know what's going to happen, right? When that separation happens, or the other person might feel intimidated because they're not getting along with everybody else and doing what the majority is doing, right? So there might be different things that might be happening there and could be offensive to a certain individual. Thank you. Great answer. So we'll do one last one and then move on. Today, a young man came through the drive-through. Lisa, who's your new team member, rang up his order. He said something outrageous and threatened Lisa in a way that left her trembling after he was gone. He was only here for a few minutes and you've never seen him before. Are you responsible for what happened? Yeah, this is a tricky one. I agree, right? So, but again, remember, it's your responsibility to provide a safe and healthy work environment, free of harassment and discrimination for all your employees, right? So it's your responsibilities to protect your employees. So if you see this happening, I would recommend that you go and speak to the customer, refuse service if that's the case, right? But you want to take action. You want to show that you've done something to provide a safe work environment for your employee. So thank you. That was a tricky one. Let's move on from this. Oops, back up a little bit. I just wanted to make sure we had enough time to have questions and answers. We have about maybe 10 minutes, give or take. Thank you all for participating. I really appreciate the time you spent busy work days to attend this webinar. We're always open to feedback, but at this point, I would like to open the floor up to any questions you might have, something that you want more clarification, or you have a certain scenario you want to ask in this forum. By all means, I'd be happy to address it. So do we provide investigations? Yes, we do, but remember that we can also be subpoenaed, as part of the investigation process. So remember that. Do we recommend asking employees to write their statement? Absolutely. if you're hearing from their own words, is a great thing. However, that should not be the only course of action. You want to maintain an atmosphere, be supportive of an atmosphere where they can come and talk to you about whatever it is. Right? So give them the option, but the way I would approach it is that, thank you for bringing this up to me. Do you want to share what the complaint is? You can write it down if you want, but I'll be writing it anyway for you. So it's a good way to ease their mind. But if you're doing that, always, get in the habit of repeating what they've shared with you to A, make sure that you haven't misquoted them, B, you've not left any important details or facts out of the complaint. Thank you for asking the question. Great questions. Anybody else have a question? There are copies of the presentation that will be available. If you want a copy, you can email us at hrsc@alphastaff.com. As in addition, you can have, the video will be available at alphastaff.com. It'll be up on the website shortly. So you can share with those who might have missed it, or you can share it to a new hire. Maybe if you want to capture something again. Thank you so much all for attending once again. Remember, be fair and consistent with all your employment decisions, regardless of performance or any other protected category. You don't want discriminating harassment based on a protected category. And also, not the intention, it's the impact. Okay. Thank you for attending, and have a great day.
Hi, Jamshed. I'm going to jump in real quickly here if you haven't closed down yet. We do invite you to our next training session, which is on July 26th, and it's regarding the 401k plan that we offer and how, as an employer, you can offer this benefit without any cost to you. So be sure to join that. Employees are always looking for benefits, so this is a great way to provide something without having any expense attached to it. So Jamshed, thanks so much for today, and everybody for your questions. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.